All right, y'all. Cory here from Grow Ensemble. Very excited to be with you here in this workshop where we're talking about building a planet-saving business and becoming a social entrepreneur. But before we dive into the substance of things, quick introduction and a little bit of briefing of where this material is coming from. But you might be familiar with me already. I'm Cory Ames. I'm the founder of Grow Ensemble, host of the Social Entrepreneurship and Innovation podcast. And anything that I'm doing in the space of responsible business, sustainable business, it's about changing the way we think about how business can and should be done. And first started Grow Ensemble a few years back with the interest in trying to answer the question, can business be done in a more ethical, responsible, and sustainable fashion? It's since then been a few years of good research and many conversations to where I think that I have some hypotheses as to how this might look, how this can and should look at the context of the world that we're living in. Personally, I live in San Antonio, Texas with my wife and our baby boy, Owen. I got 2 pups here, and as well, we're living on a decent sized property, at least within the city limits of San Antonio. Getting more interested in permaculture and a little bit of homesteading, finding how we live a bit more self-sufficiently here and experiment with different ways of capturing and retaining more water, using different alternative energy sources. So that's the personal project that's really occupying a lot of my time right now. But anyways, on to where this workshop, the material I'm sharing with you, is coming from. Briefly, more of my experience here in business. I withdrew from college, dropped out of college early, and that was with the invitation to work for a really fast-growing small business in the space of digital marketing. And so I started working for that company when I was 19 and ended up getting promoted to the CEO position of that digital marketing agency, a multi-million-dollar business at that point with 25 or so full-time employees. Interesting experience with the owners there, which I've shared in bits and pieces through the podcast and other interviews that I've done on other folks' podcasts. But perhaps that story's more for another time. But that left me in something of an existential crisis, wondering if the skills that I developed of that, and as well as certainly the burning of the ships there to really put all my eggs in the basket of digital marketing and entrepreneurship and business, was it all worth it? And so this drove me into Grow Ensemble, this media and education company in 2019. As I mentioned with that initial inquiry, can business be done in a better way? So since then, I've conducted literally hundreds of interviews and had many more conversations not recorded on the podcast with social entrepreneurs. This has added hundreds of hours of research, deconstructing some of those companies, those entrepreneurs' experience. And I'm not sure that there's a book in the broad space of responsible business that I'm at least not familiar with. There are a few that I haven't even skimmed through, but not many. So I've spent all this time synthesizing all this research, seeing patterns, lessons, both from my own experience, what it's looked like growing and building Grow Ensemble very in the early stages, as well as reflecting on so many of the lessons that have been shared with me from more experienced social entrepreneurs as to what I can share with y'all here today. So our goals for today, a few things. We're going to talk about definitions. First, what is social entrepreneurship? And I think that this may seem a little bit technical or mechanical. Why even go through the definition of social entrepreneurship? There's nuance of which I think is very important to pay attention to. We'll use some of the examples that I'm going to share, case studies of social entrepreneurs out in the world, to reflect on that definition and emphasize particular points. Likewise, that overlaps with the characteristics of successful social entrepreneurs, what separates them from others, and what has them stand out. And then we'll move on to identifying your particular problem, what I call the founder problem fit. And we'll talk a little bit of an overview of funding options. And lastly, some resources to get you connected with this space of social entrepreneurship, books, communities, conferences. And then lastly, not listed here, but I do have a little bit of a bonus for y'all, the launch of your potential social impact project. What I would do if I was starting all over today in starting my social entrepreneurial journey. So let's get into definitions first and foremost, talking about what is social entrepreneurship. So we'll define it here, breaking down, really the 2 parts of it, right? There's social and entrepreneur. And so the social component refers to some sort of positive or social or environmental impact. The entrepreneur component, and this is a definition from Merriam-Webster. I think it's very important to pay attention to this. An entrepreneur is one who organizes, manages, and assumes the risk of a business or enterprise. And the brackets I've added, which is the definition of an enterprise, a project or undertaking. So this is important to pay attention to. I think that entrepreneur, the connotations are strictly to business in the for-profit sector, but as we can see by the definition, it's much broader than that. It's much more inclusive of that of who is an entrepreneur and what does an entrepreneur do. So social entrepreneurship is the undertaking of a business or enterprise for the purpose of positive social or environmental impact. Although many of those are quite related and do overlap. So the two components here, the social is exclusive and the entrepreneurship component of it is actually quite inclusive. And so I don't think this is exactly what you would think at first look or first thought with social entrepreneurship. Who is a social entrepreneur and what does it look like? The social component is exclusive for the fact that it's really what separates who is a social entrepreneur and who isn't. And this isn't important for the sake of pointing out and calling people out and saying someone who may call themselves a social entrepreneur say, hey, no, you aren't. But it's really important for us to understand these definitions, I think, in the broader context of responsible business, sustainability, and sustainable business, because many of these terms are being adopted more into the mainstream, thrown around, I think, a bit loosely without us actually talking about what this does and does not look like. And they do affect things significantly. We've seen a lot of consumer trends and research that shows that people, I'm sure you feel this way too, supporting businesses or not, you're looking for businesses that appear to be more sustainable or have commitments to sustainability versus others that don't. And a big question here is what's more important? Perception or reality? Is it just as important that a business appears to be sustainable and brands themselves as such and markets as such without really walking the way? Maybe they're doing some minimal things, but not taking as much action as they could. Or is it more important that they actually are sustainable? In the context of what's going to affect consumer behavior, I think perception might be the ultimate thing. Someone might be sustainable, but not market and brand it very well, and they don't get all the benefit of having that label attached to themselves. But for our purposes, it's really important that these definitions, I think, are clear and explicit. And so it's that social component, which talks to the environmental or social impact, that is very important. It's the purpose of what project is being undertaken, whether that be a business, nonprofit, or whatever. Social or environmental impact is the purpose. And so it's also nuanced, right? This looks a lot of different ways, and this is why we'll talk some examples. Then entrepreneurship is oddly inclusive, whereas before I really dug into the thought process behind this, I thought it wouldn't be that way. I thought it would strictly pertain to business, but a friend of mine, Madeline Shaw, I'm going to quote here in a second, she's the one who really opened things up for me to think about that, all the different ways that entrepreneurship can in fact look. The model doesn't so much matter, a nonprofit business project or whatever. So let's talk Madeline Shaw here, a friend of mine who I've hosted a few different interviews with in the podcast. She is the co-founder of Luna Pads, now rebranded as Isle there. We'll talk about that company in a bit. Nestwork's first family-friendly co-working space in Vancouver, Canada. And she's the author of the book, The Greater Good, Social Entrepreneurship for Everyday People Who Want to Change the World, of which I had the great pleasure to be an early reader for. And that'll be one of the books that I certainly recommend you pick up if this is a space you want to get more into. But I've edited a quote from her from one of our interviews as I asked her what her definition of social entrepreneurship was. She explained it as being very expansive and democratic. She's the one who went into breaking down the terms, which had me think about it in a different way. She says entrepreneur is derived from a French verb, which means to undertake. And this is all verified and confirmed. And it's about undertaking something, an action or initiative. What she said really is that it doesn't so much exactly matter what it looks like. What is important is that action is being taken. And the second part of her definition here about the social component, which precedes the word entrepreneur, importantly comes first. Social is shorthand for some sort of positive social or environmental impact. And that can be anything as to what she says, whatever matters to the entrepreneur. But the point is that it's what drives the undertaking that's being undertaken. It's the central purpose. In contrast to traditional business, where people are looking to make a profit or capture a certain market segment. The purpose of conventional business is for people to make money, make a profit. But the primary desire there is not to make the world a better place in some way. And so, this will get a little bit more nitty-gritty as we share some examples. But social entrepreneurship is less so about exactly what you do. And I would caveat that it does have to be involved in some sort of social or environmental impact. That really is a broad umbrella. It's less so about what exactly you do and what it looks like, but more so about why you're doing it. So exclusive to the why you're doing it, inclusive to exactly what you're doing and exactly what it looks like. So let's talk some examples here. Gia Schneider. She is what I would refer to as a conscious engineer. She might consider herself less engineer-y than her co-founder, her brother Abe. However, what her company does, Natel Energy, they're creating a new kind of climate-resilient hydropower that prioritizes biodiversity alongside renewable energy generation. So, highly technical solution, right? What Natel Energy did is ultimately engineer a new type of hydropower turbine, and I'm sure I'm oversimplifying this, that is fish friendly, as that was a huge drawback of conventional hydropower projects, and likewise plays a critical role in the restoration of rivers. And this is because dams are quite the major intervention. And so Natel spent literally a decade in research and development, if not, I think perhaps a larger component of that, to be able to make this renewable energy resource, hydropower, more available without the historic negative impacts. She was, all these folks who I'm sharing have been previous guests of the podcast. It's been great to dig deep into their stories. A like example, which is a guest who I've recorded a show with but haven't published yet, is Coral Vita. And so Coral Vita, they have determined a process for regrowing and planting coral to help restore coral reefs. Something likewise, not exactly the same, a little bit less mechanical, but still very a technical solution and precise solution. Next here, I have Brett Isaac. So Brett Isaac is what I refer to as a community leader. And so his company, Navajo Power, is founded to maximize the economic benefits of clean energy for tribal and impacted communities. So I think solar has that overlap of the social and environmental impact by definition, but it's not just exactly how he's doing solar. So I always say this as well, that it's not just important what we do in the context of becoming more sustainable or making a more sustainable economy. It's as important, maybe if not more important, what we value. And for example, you could run a solar company and still run it like ultimately these fuel companies of old, perhaps use a bunch of misinformation and propaganda essentially to advance your special interests, whatever it may be, withhold information, research, and data that greatly affects the general public. It's not just the fact that they are burning these fuels that emit very toxic levels of carbon and warm the planet as they have. It's also the ways in which they've run their business and what they've shown to have value. And so here, I think this is a good example, solar being a component of it. But what Brett is focusing on is maximizing the economic benefits for tribal and impacted communities. So he's focusing very much so in the inclusivity of the economy to come. This make sure that the clean energy economy is a more equitable economy. And another example here, likewise, another guest I've recorded a show with but haven't published. Her name is Anyale Halova. She's a real estate developer based in Portland, Oregon. Her firm is called Adre, but they are an equity-centered developer. And so they are taking on particular projects with ensuring that the development projects to come, while they provide the opportunity for growth locally and very specifically to the communities in which those projects are placed, but making sure that they are done equitably. Make sure that this sort of development and growth leaves no one behind genuinely, not just as talking points. And so these community leaders are focusing on helping to ensure that particular folks, groups, their rights, their benefits are protected. And then I have a couple good friends of mine here, Nivi Achanta and Brandon Harvey. This is what I would call micromedia. I might toss Grow Ensemble into the same category, but Nivi runs the Soapbox Project, which is her mission is to make social impact easier for busy people. She hosts a community, writes a really excellent newsletter to take people from what she says is climate angst and overwhelm to climate action. She has helped build a community of people interested in small, progressively larger, but meaningful actions to play a role in addressing climate change. And then Brandon Harvey, another friend of mine, is the founder of the company Good, Good, Good. They say that they help you find good news, celebrate good news, and become good news. It's a media company that helps you feel more hopeful and do more good. So they're highlighting solutions-based news to get readers more engaged, active, and hopeful. Very cool movement. I think this stems out of the solutions journalism movement. But research has been done to show that people who consume solutions-based news do feel, as Brandon is describing, more hopeful and more active, because we can certainly all attest to the kind of doom and gloom feeling that we get from often consuming typical kind of traditional media. And so Good is focusing on, he says, real good news, not just feel good news. It's not about, dogs and babies interacting, but it's about solutions to important problems, where those things are happening and being acted on within the world. And next we have Dean Sycon, huge fan of Dean and his work. This is what I would refer to as a standard bearer. Dean's Beans offers specialty coffee as a vehicle for positive change. Dean was previously an environmental and indigenous rights lawyer. He then co-founded a development-based nonprofit organization in coffee called Coffee Kids, I believe. And then he founded Dean's Beans. And so the standard bearer is what I determine is someone who sees a particular industry or where the mainstream or main mean of doing business is something that is exploitative and extractive. And so in the context of coffee, for one, there's a lot of environmental degradation done from the coffee farming. Coffee farmers are exploited and treated extremely unfairly. And so Dean saw this model well with a very intimate understanding of that entire supply chain in the communities, the coffee farming communities directly affected from large American companies like Starbucks as an example. Dean said, here, I'm just going to run a coffee business and show that, yes, it in fact can be done in an ethical and sustainable fashion. Other businesses like this, Tony's Chocolonely, I would say, is another example in the chocolate industry. Likewise, there's a lot of child labor involved in the chocolate supply chains. Tony's hasn't escaped completely becoming a part of that story. But the founding story is very much so akin to the standard bearing, an industry where the predominant means of doing business is exploitative, extractive. They got into business, the founder got into business from, he was, I believe, a journalist originally, reporting on the chocolate industry, and was just blown away by how egregious the offenses were and decided to start Tony's Chocolonely. Veja, a French sneaker brand, likewise got into making sneakers the way that they did. Fashion industry can be extremely wasteful, likewise exploitative of the workers throughout the supply chain and extractive from the natural resources in those communities. A lot of things involved in fashion, agriculture, workers' rights, all that. And likewise with these food companies. But Veja, I would say, is another standard bearer, an example of that type of company, and core to the reason why they started the business. That's very important, and we'll talk about some non-examples here in a second. And then we have another friend of mine, actually local to the San Antonio area, the one local-ish person I'll share here, but Yanni Medhin. His company is called Grain for Grain. They upcycle spent grain to create low-carb, high-protein, keto-friendly flour and products. And I call these folks trash collectors. Maybe that's not I couldn't think of a better term there. I'll work on that one. But these are folks who are intimately involved in constructing a circular economy. They're looking to close the waste loop here and find things that we are considering waste and repurposing them and upcycling them, in this case, to add value to them once again and use them for something else. Grain for Grain gets spent beer grain from the beer brewing process from local breweries throughout here in the greater San Antonio area. They then take that grain, again, oversimplifying, I'm sure, but from their own process, they can then turn that grain into this flour, which happens to be low carb and high protein. That's not exactly the purpose. Obviously, you can't help but notice Yanni looks like quite the fit guy from that photo there. But I think the nutritional component is something more so as to he found an audience that it might resonate with. But what he got into it for was seeing something that and he's very much so an engineering type, likewise, saw something that we're determining was waste, could find some greater use to it. A couple other examples here, both in the fashion industry. A Queen of Raw purposes unused textiles and gets those back in circulation to folks who will use them and buy them. Donna, Shamini Donna, the founder there, a visionary designer and industry veteran in the fashion space, a company that is taking no inventory. And so Donna repurposes your old clothing and materials to make new garments for you. So I think their cornerstone product is the circular memory jacket, is what she calls it, where you send them in a collection of old t-shirts that are memorable to you, events, concerts, whatever it might be, things that you have some personal connection to, and they repurpose those to actually, and you think about that, and I think of like the kind of classic t-shirt blankets, and those are fine. It's not necessarily something stylish, but I think that they do a very good job of making them attractive, very cool jackets and worth checking out. And then Madeline Shaw, my friend mentioned earlier, as a provider. So her company, Isle, as I mentioned, formerly known as Lunapads, was the first companies in the world to bring modern reusable period products to the masses. Maybe the masses is an overstatement. There are other companies to follow, but it was founded in 1993. Madeline found that there weren't good options, anything more sustainable, environmentally friendly for feminine hygiene products. And since rebranded as Isle, they say they believe the period aisle should be stocked with radically comfortable products that actually work for people and the planet. Some other examples here. And the founding stories really vary here. It depends. But I think these are examples. Nonetheless, Pila provided the world's first compostable phone case. I actually have one on my phone right now. A fan of theirs. There's other companies that have since done it likewise, but that was Jeremy Lang, the founder. He became personally connected to the issue of plastic pollution, phone case. He was looking into consumer products. What are consumer products that we could make what are consumer products that are disposable that we could make a little bit more environmentally friendly by designing them and engineering them differently? And so then came phone case. He wasn't personally attached to phone cases specifically, but that issue of plastic pollution. Stasher is something similar. Likewise, I believe that was the first silicone reusable food storage bag that came to market. Someone may correct me, but that is an example of that, providing something that wasn't in the market that offers. These seem to be a bit more environmental. I'm sure there's other good social examples too. I would say providers maybe making those products more accessible is probably the greatest social impact that can be done with those, because I think that this is a major critique, rightfully so, of quote unquote sustainable products, is that they're typically a higher up price tag. And the typical rebut to that is that it pays off over time. For example, Stasher bags, a great one. And I think Isle too, I've had this conversation with Madeline, fine discussion, that it's cheaper ultimately to purchase those reusable products than the disposables. There will be some point where the cost of the reusable becomes less if you're continuing to purchase the same disposables. Totally. However, upfront price tags are significant and do affect people's decision-making. There's been tons and tons of research done on that. So it's a legitimate critique. And so I do think that of this type of social entrepreneur, not that these folks aren't interested in doing such, but I do think that should be part of the definition of bringing a sustainable product to market. What means sustainable is as well accessible, but it's a little bit of a offshoot. So notable non-examples. Before I share this, I just want to say that this is not about trashing anybody or anything. The examples of the companies I share here, these are companies that I respect and admire. Many of the folks I've spoken to personally, one way or another, and likewise, my personal experiences with them have been nothing short of great. So this is by no means to trash anyone or critique anyone. I am tying this back to what I said earlier. The definitions are very important. They are very important because, like I said, many of these terms have been and will continue to be co-opted for some sort of profit or gain. And so it's important for us to discern what is what so that we can be a bit more pragmatic and realistic about what are things that will affect change, where is more change needed, and how can we look at that seriously. And of course, I love being inclusive and more people getting into the fold. I think we need to be realistic as to what things are going to make the change that we need. Are we seriously considering more drastic or maybe uncomfortable changes versus just bringing everybody under the tent because it feels good? And so these are some nuanced discussions, but I do want to preface that this isn't some means to trash any of these companies, but I will explain why they don't fit the fold. So there's others that exist. They fall broadly into the space of sustainable business or purpose-driven business. Some big names that I think you may recognize here, of course, Patagonia, Cotopaxi, Warby Parker, and Tom's. And so why don't these businesses fit the mold? These businesses weren't built to address a specific social or environmental problem. Impact is not part of the core operation. So the reason these folks got into business wasn't necessarily to address some sort of social or environmental issue, which ties all the way back to our definition of social entrepreneurship, right? That's the reason that the undertaking is being undertaken. These businesses do a lot of good with what they do. I would call it more so charity, right? So Patagonia sells outdoor apparel. Tom sells shoes. Cotopaxi sells outdoor apparel. Warby Parker sells glasses. And Tom's and Warby Parker become quite notable historically for their give back models. Buy one, give one. That is charity. Patagonia, likewise, huge environmental activist component in environmental grassroots funding, all this kind of stuff. Founded 1% for the Planet organization, of which Grow Ensemble has been a part of for the last few years. A lot of money goes to environmental causes. Their tagline is they're in business to save our home planet. Cotopaxi, outdoor retailer, they claim to be on a mission to eradicate poverty in the Americas from their charitable actions. But the core of what their business does on a day-to-day basis is not addressing some sort of impact. Patagonia is just selling apparel. Tom's selling shoes and other apparel. Warby Parker glasses. Cotopaxi apparel. What the core of what these businesses do are sell their products, and their products don't necessarily address some sort of social or environmental component head on. It would be different if it was like more the provider. They are working to make their products more sustainable, and they're becoming more sustainable over time. They're still causing a lot of impact and damage as a product of that. You get into the argument a little bit here is some of the good, the charity that these companies are doing, does it offset the bad and the negative environmental impacts or social impacts? Let's take Tom's here as an example. It's a very inspiring story of Blake Mycoskie, the original founder, got into business, wanted to do something, noticed these kids without shoes in, I think, Argentina, and wanted to provide them with shoes. It came, I think, maybe about 7 or 8 years after, if not a full decade, in which Tom's did research on their give back programs and the impact of it to see if it was in fact measurably making. So kudos to them for doing that research and soliciting that. These external organizations, from what I understand, they were phenomenal to work with. Tom's wanted not to be anonymous. They wanted everything fully transparent. So good for them. At the same time, the researchers did find that it was inconclusive, if not maybe slightly negative, the impact of giving away these shoes. It potentially made these communities a bit more dependent on foreign aid versus their own proper communities. And likewise, they were affecting the sales of local shoemakers. Very small number. It wasn't that huge of an impact. But the thing is here, that company was built off this mission to make the world a better place. And it comes 5, 6, they made millions of shoe donations at that point and came to find that it was not positive and not neutral, maybe even slightly negative, the impact that they were making. And so they ended up shifting course, and you can see now Tom's has different efforts in which they get involved with, mental health maybe, but you can see that the company wasn't started from the social entrepreneurial lens. They've made a good point to try and become more responsible, ethical, and sustainable. Long ways to go for a lot of these companies, but I think that it's important honing on that. The people weren't getting into these businesses for the sake of addressing a social environmental problem. It was still business. The goal and the object was to make a profit, and then it's something that let's feel a bit better about that. Let's be a bit more responsible. We have to do some part to contribute, maybe clean up our own mess. And so that kind of comes more to the social and environmental responsibility of these businesses versus a social entrepreneurial purpose and driving mission. Open to discussion on that. Maybe this fires something up in you. I'd be interested to know. Like I mentioned there, impact is not the core of the operation. These businesses have huge charitable arms, social responsibility arms, corporate social responsibility departments. The larger ones anyways, where people are focused predominantly on that. So it is external. It's not the core function of the business. But let's jump to now part 2, becoming a social entrepreneur, and start first by talking about finding your problem. This is what I call founder problem fit. Not sure if this is my term. If I'm coining this, I haven't heard it just yet, at least in this context of social entrepreneurship. But this has been inspired from many of my guests and friends who have talked to these effects, essentially. The problem for you that you're meant to solve is somewhere in this intersection of what's sustainable, what you can continue to do, and then what and who you like. We'll talk about these more in depth in a second, and what's important enough to solve. Jumping back here. So starting first, who you like. This is a really important litmus. Can you enjoy doing what you'll be doing? And this isn't to say that everything should just be a passion project all day long. It should be your passion and you're going to love every second of it. There's pros and cons to everything. Are you willing to endure the cons? And do you like the pros enough to where it's really worth it for you to stick with this for a long time? The second piece of that is, do you like who you'd be serving? And so this is a really important question, I think, imagining, and this is from another friend of mine, just speaking to conventional business, but imagine yourself getting lunch every single week with who would be your clients, customers, or beneficiaries. Is that a community, a group that you'd enjoy being around, enjoy learning more about? And so this for me feels like why it comes to ultimately finding groups that you're already a part of in some way, or that you used to be a part of or really have an affinity for. So you don't have to be a part of the group. If it's a group that you're very interested in, genuinely, authentically, and that you'd like and enjoy spending a lot of time around, I think that's critically important. And then, what's important? So what's important enough to you to work on? And so there's a lot of important problems in the world to work on. Not all of them resonate with each one of us in the same way. And so you need to find what sort of impact or problem works best for you. What's most important to you? Because if you're faking it, things won't sustain, won't last. If you're trying to fit it in to liking it, forcing it, like I said, this is a long haul. The advice that I've gotten from countless social entrepreneurs and my own experience here in these first few years is that things take more time, energy, and money than you can imagine. And just be prepared for the long haul. That's the greatest advice that I've gotten. And so if you're reframing it as a marathon and not a sprint, and genuinely taking that on and embodying that, things look a lot different as opposed to what you do, who you associate with, and what you're going to focus on. So think about, what could you at least spend a decade in, if not more? There's a lot of things that we could do, and I do think it's very empowering to let go of some of those things that we like, but may not really find the love for doing and think have the viability for us personally. And finally, on those same lines, like, what's sustainable? And so this doesn't mean that this is not speaking to specifically the for-profit venture. We have to think about, where's the money come from, and how much do you need, and how much time, and where are you going to find that time? And so these are the two reasons that most small businesses fail, and I imagine most organizations, nonprofit or whatever, that time and money. It's either, if it's small, people don't have the time to really get it up and running, full-time jobs, part-time jobs, their parents, life happens. I get it. It's tough to fit time in for this. I have an almost one-year-old son. For any parents watching this, I get that time is a constraint. And likewise, money is always a thing. Absolutely. And how much you're able to invest, willing to invest, where you're going to get it. A nonprofit, that's always a horror story, is the fundraising cycles, all that kind of stuff. You be creative and figure out how this is going to be sustainable for you. It doesn't have to be miserable. Absolutely not. It's just a thing it's worth being realistic and crafty around, and making it a serious priority, because it helps smooth so many things along. And with money, it doesn't have to be a lot of money. It has to be enough money. And so we'll talk about that in a second as we talk about funding sources. So spend some time with this, think about that. And if you have some sort of broad topic in mind, like for me, when I first started, I'd say it's sustainable business. Like I said, that question is what got me started with Grow Ensemble. How can business be done in a more ethical, responsible, sustainable way? Can it even be done in that way? So broadly, sustainable business. You don't have to get more specific than that just yet. At least this is my advice. What follows, though, is then doing your research. This is when a lot of the work comes. I think that there's a lot of advice that's not loaded into this, where you got to get familiar with your space, your sector, your environment, because the idea that you're going to know how to address a particular community's issues, unless you've been a part of that community for your entire life, it's a bit far-fetched. And so there's a lot of people that I imagine we think we could serve or help that we just don't know enough about yet. And this is a very important assumption to test and work through. Speaking to our research, that broad topic, two components here: get experience and get learning, right? So kind of boring, but these are things that I think are initial really great steps. So to test many of your hypotheses of these areas that you think you might want to work in. What kind of impact do you want to make? Work for a dream organization. Find someone you're like, oh, that would absolutely be, I love what they do. How could I work for that organization in some way? Sometimes that's even just a volunteer experience or just getting familiar with them. You don't even have to get a job, but reach out and see how you can talk to these people, visit offices, whatever. Get that personal connection and experience with those organizations. Build a good list of what organizations would inspire you in what you decide to build, and who could you imagine yourself working for? And yeah, this might take years, because if you're talking about getting a job, you're probably going to be in a job for a few years, but that sort of experience might make, so I make this important point here, Who you know and what you know will make anything independent that you do so much easier. So think an investment in a few years in another organization or business is going to help fast track what you do down the line. And so many people in the space, it's very generous, open, because we're wanting to solve the same issues. We're on the same team. These are problems to solve. The goal isn't competition. It's collaboration and cooperation. That's what comes back to the importance of the definitions. If people are in it for different reasons, then the motivations seem different. And so likewise, working for your dream organizations, it's important for you to be able to assess where is the purpose coming from. And then you just make your decisions of who to work for, what capacity, who to check out, who is actually a model for you and inspiration for you, eyes wide open. You can start a small side project. It doesn't have to be a whole organization or a business or whatever. Think about what's one project that you could do that finds a way into what you're doing. And so think about something like that. And the dollar figures to a fundraiser or whatever, it might be hundreds or just a couple thousands of dollars, not something much more significant. And the timeline, they're small experiments, right? You don't have to commit your life to something that you aren't sure about just yet. Test the water and get learning. So through having those experiences, you're learning just kind of as a product of it. You can't help but learn. But likewise, have conversations with people. Reach out to people who are doing things in your region, your area, or likewise, the power of the internet, we can be a bit more broad with that, global, international, whatever it is. For example, this is my podcast. This is a huge reason why I started the podcast, is to have all these conversations with people that I thought really inspired me. And I test my theories, my hypotheses constantly through having more and more conversations. And likewise, consume everything you can on the subject. I'm a huge reader, so I'm reading all those books. I'll check out other podcasts, that kind of stuff. And I pay attention to what I naturally develop an affinity for. You can try and kind of force the issue, I think, which is something to be aware of. What feels like work and what feels a little bit more smooth, I've noticed this, and it's a constant thing that I have to test or give myself some patience for. But when I'm doing something I really enjoy, sometimes I feel a bit guilty, like it should be harder or more difficult. And so part of Grow Ensemble has been paying attention to that feeling. It's like, where do I feel guilty for the things that I'm doing that I think can genuinely be work because I'm just enjoying them so much. And so that's so much of my podcast, the research that I do, the reading that I do, the writing that I do. I love those things. And not all of it's perfect. It's not all just easy peasy, but those are things that inspire that feeling like I should be working. And so pay attention to what that is for yourself. All right, let's talk about funding. And this is definitely just a broad overview, but I want you to get familiar with the options. It boils down to predominantly two areas here, and continuing on, we'll show it's internal money or external money. And bootstrapping is a broad name for internal money. And I think there's percentage points on this. Grow Ensemble has been 100% bootstrapped. And so there's reasons for that, of which I'll explain. But bootstrapping, you can get cash from somewhere to start up. Of course, easy one is your personal money, savings. If you have a part-time job, full-time job that you're still working, taking off some percentage of that to invest into what it is that you're going to build or save up for to build. You don't have to burn the ships and get started right away. I wouldn't recommend that either. I think, like I said, do your research and stuff like that. And in that research stage, I'd wait to really burn the ships and commit full on to a particular topic, because you might pivot quite a bit. And I think that's to be expected. And outside of that, there's other options, more bootstrapping-ish, crowdfunding, where you're not giving up ownership of anything, any project that you have. But there's both nonprofit project crowdfunding. There's product crowdfunding. Obviously, there's a lot of good examples of people raising money for products that they're then going to build. So a lot of creative options there. If folks need more reference points, let me know. There's grants for various things. I know it depends on what you're doing, but I know Nitel Energy, as an example, a hydropower company, they've received a good amount of government grants, which is money they don't have to pay back, but for doing the research that they're doing, because that's a pretty important problem to solve, and that's worth the government, quote unquote, investing in. So look for things like that. There's not just government agencies, but a lot of local charitable organizations. You'd be surprised. There's always a lot of local money for some reason where people have interest in giving funds to either new small businesses or nonprofit ventures that benefit the community. And then there's donations, nonprofit route specifically, soliciting donations from just people out in the world. But the key point here is the clarity of the business model is really important. And you don't need to rush into this, I'd say, but the sooner that you can get clear on what it is that you do, not to rush it, But the sooner you can get clearer on that, then I think the sooner that makes bootstrapping easier or more sensible. And then on the investment side, there's a lot of different investment, external money. Friends and family is usually the quick one. Those can be in the form of personal loans or friends and family investing in the company. Small business loans, again, that's not giving up ownership of the business. It's loans from a local bank. I put credit cards there because I think it's something that people consider. Growing a business or project or whatever off credit cards. Do not do that. The interest rates are atrocious. It's not good debt to get into or feasible debt to get into. Equity investors, these are foundations or whatever, or investment firms to where they are taking some component of ownership of the business for an investment. And so that can vary widely as to who that is, what they look like, what the partnership looks like, how much control they get, whatever. And then on the farthest end of that is venture capital, which is the smallest percentage of investments that are made, but maybe the most mainstream or sexy or whatever because of all the tech stuff over the last few years. But the key point here is who is giving you money. So that relationship's really important. And so sorting that out, it has to feel good. There's a lot of other resources on this, many in the books that I do mention at the end here for you to get started. My friend Madeline Shaw's book, The Greater Good, she has a really great chapter on these components. And some simple charts here, and I wouldn't say that these numbers should be taken 100%, but so I say here as well, is potential, speed of implementation or your projects and uptime, and potential loss of control and addition of pressure. It doesn't mean that this is the case, right? But it's something of a scale. Money, this being for least amount of speed or whatever, or need for speed if you're managing it in a reasonable way, what feels like you're getting to bootstrapping it to where your project is as sustainable as possible from outside of your own savings, your own money, whatever. The more money, the more that you have the discretion to move at the pace that you want to move, although it's slower, generally slower because you don't have the investment to move as fast as perhaps you'd like. But you retain complete control and external pressure is zero, right? The only pressure is what you manage with yourself. Put that on the other end of the spectrum, VC money is going to be the highest. VCs typically want some high return in a short timeline. And you put all the other investment scenarios really in this frame. In increments, I would say, and it all depends, right? But friends and family, small business loans, equity investors, I put it in that order along this chart, and they can vary. This is an average of where they fall, right? So keep that in mind. This is generally the internal money goes this way with pressure, but as well, you have the drawback of maybe not moving as fast as you need to or you'd like to, but I'd warrant some patience. And then external money increasing the potential pressure, but there's a lot of other opportunities. Maybe you get plugged into more specific mentorship. Maybe you could build something bigger, faster. It depends on who you are. For me with Grow Ensemble, I've always made it a point to be bootstrapped. That might have been how I was influenced by the business I worked for previously and in many of the businesses I was familiar with, just small businesses that didn't take on any external investment. And my belief on that is that I've retained more freedom. I've gotten to work at the pace that I've wanted to. I'm not interested necessarily in scaling something to massive national, international type of thing. I'm interested in a different kind of type of impact. But maybe my own ignorance on the benefits of investment kept me from some opportunities that I don't even know about. So something to keep in mind. This is my experience and I've gravitated this way. It doesn't mean that others are not the way to go. This is really why it makes sense to have a lot of conversations and feel what makes the best sense for you. I definitely lean this way personally. But the key's here. You got to determine what you want. Likewise, this is the type of lifestyle that you want. So I'm not reporting to any investors or whatever it is. It's my business. I get to run it how I want. I've definitely seen some reasons for cash or whatever throughout the past and that I thought might help me, but it hasn't been something that has affected my life in a great way. And in fact, I think what I've learned is that Grow Ensemble could be the business that it is now from a much earlier point, and that didn't involve some of external money. Your business model, like I said, carving out business model or just project model, thinking about it. What is the sequence of it? Where does money come? How much money do you need? Getting clear and clear on that, and it's okay to not have a very clear answer to start. Be patient on all that, right? So don't rush into getting money from the wrong people. These kind of two last bullet points are related, but can't stress that enough. Don't rush into getting money from the wrong people. Or likewise, be patient with yourself. If you decide to bootstrap, I think there's so much external pressure from people to build something big, open more retail stores, sell more product, increase your revenue, whatever it is. Be patient because one, There's so many times where bigger models go astray. Bring back to the Tom's model. It's not that, they spent years giving shoe donations before they knew whether that was effective or not. Maybe that's something they should have figured out from the beginning. If that was legitimately going to be a social entrepreneurial venture, as opposed to just more so like ultimately a branding thing as to what I would relate it more so towards. I think it's worth doing the work to understand, because your project, your business, your organization is going to change shape. Solutions are going to evolve. And I do think with how the world's changing, if you are getting things wrong, which we inevitably do, it's better to do it on a smaller scale than larger scale. And scale, by definition, might be a place where things start to break down. And this is a principle I've discussed in other places, but we'll talk about more as we dig deeper into the world of sustainable business and social entrepreneurship together. Maybe small is by definition more sustainable. A lot of the pressures to build big, I think, can weigh on people and really stress people out. So it's important to think about what you want, what kind of impact you want to make, and test your assumptions and learn more about what that looks like. So get connected, a list of resources here. All y'all should have access to these slides, so all these links will be available. I'm not going to go through these one for one, but these are some really great resources, books, communities, conferences, or otherwise that I'd recommend getting in touch with, checking out, clicking through. I'll just make mention here on social media. As you learn about more people from the books that you read or whatever, connect with them on LinkedIn, Twitter, or whatever you're active on, or wherever they're active too. Start to see what they talk about, how they talk about it, what's important to them. I think that you learn a lot that way. I don't love social media, or I loathe and love social media. It's built me a lot of really good connections and access to people and communities that I otherwise wouldn't have had. But of course, we all know the trivialities of it. But a few conferences linked up here. Volunteering at conferences is a great way to just get yourself involved and on scene. And so I volunteered at the B Corp conference originally, learned so much from that first experience, and then I went back as a proper attendee the following year. But the volunteer experience was great, and I'd recommend that for people. So those are a few things. You can, again, reference them in the attached slides. And last bonus here. So this is the no launch plan of what I would do today if I was starting all over with my social entrepreneurial journey, no matter the topic I'm talking about. But this is what I do. Very simple. And the key here is simplicity. But if you don't know exactly what a business might be that you'd start, nonprofit organization, or if you don't even know if it'd be a business, nonprofit, or just a collection of projects that you make, this is what I'd recommend doing. And so this is from my lens of what I do, but I would pick that niche or that topic, and can be broad. Think about mine. Mine was ethical, responsible business, sustainable business. It's a pretty broad space, and it looks a lot of different ways, but that's what I picked. And then I went to a podcast, but I started a newsletter at the same time. I think I started maybe too many things at once early on, which I think is a thing that most all people say is simplify and get down to fewer things. But I would start a free or low cost newsletter, something that you write and send out with regular frequency, monthly or whatever. And that doesn't have to be an overwhelming amount of writing if writing's not your thing, but start a newsletter to where you can collect email addresses for contacts, people that you meet, people who are going to follow along with your journey of what you learn and what you're potentially starting. And then just dive into learning about it and do the research. This could even be done if you just got a new job, whatever it is. If you're interested in regenerative organic agriculture as an example, and you work for the Regenerative Organic Alliance that's in charge of certifying farms for regenerative organic practices, that's a pretty cool experience to document all the different farms and agriculture organizations that you learn about, whatever. You start learning about it, conduct your own interviews. You don't need to publish a podcast. You can just conduct interviews and write them up or whatever it is. The books that you read, events you attend, research, and share what you're learning in that regular newsletter and make it good. Monthly is fine. I do less versus more and focus on quality to where people are excited to see that email in their inbox every month, and share what you learn and collect more emails. Always use this thing. You write this newsletter about regenerative organic agriculture and collect emails, events you go to, share it on social media or whatever. And then, so this is why it's the no launch plan. If you've built an entire community of people following along with your journey in social entrepreneurship, regenerative organic agriculture, affordable housing, whatever it is that you want to learn more about, when you decide to launch something yourself, you then have hundreds, if not thousands of people potentially ready to support you. Maybe you make a product and you want to do a crowdfunding initiative, depending on what you learn about. And this is what I would recommend. If you're not sure what to start on, but generally interested in some subject matter, start it, and then you can even change what the newsletter is about. There's some free low-cost options there, ghost.org or ConvertKit, and I'd recommend checking those out. Ghost is probably what I would lean towards. ConvertKit is what I use for my newsletter, and I like it, and I wouldn't switch at this point. The switching costs a little too high for me. But yeah, so this is what I recommend. And I think this would be a wonderful way to really not only get your learning in, do your research, but start to build a community of people around you and what you're doing, and potentially set the stage for a launch of whatever that ends up looking like. So that's it, y'all. Here speaking to social entrepreneurship, becoming a social entrepreneur, building that planet-saving business or organization. If you have questions, of course, let me know. Cory at growensemble.com. I want to make sure that these materials always deliver for you. So if something you had questions about didn't get answered, feel free to let me know. Maybe it's something we can update here at some point or do in a new workshop or some new material to come. All right, y'all. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for spending the time with me.